G'day and welcome to the Ball Boys AFL Fantasy Podcast. We are we're skipping over the overpriced forwards because there aren't really any, and we're talking the mid-priced options in your forward line today. Let's go.
Just done it from nowhere. Hoisted the goal from inside the field. Sheed from the boundary. Dusty. Petty. Petrarca. Oh, wow. How good is that? The legend becomes immortal.
G'day and welcome again to the Ball Boys AFL Fantasy Podcast. I am your host, Mitch Casey, and you can find me on Twitter at Ball Boys Fantasy. Joined by Luke once again, mate. How are you?
Yeah, good, mate. Always good. Kids were back at school today.
First day back with kids?
Yeah, and first day on the high school for me too. So I didn't get beaten up by a
Okay,
big
no
high
one took your
school
lunch
kid.
money?
No one took my lunch money. So
that's good.
As far as I'm concerned, that's a win.
That is a win. That's a win. Back at work. Hot day here in old Brisbane. It's going to be a hot week as well. So,
Not wrong.
you know, plenty of room for some hot takes.
Oh
maybe,
my goodness! What a segue that was. I wasn't sure where you were going.
But we're talking about mid prices. But before we do start, I'm officially retiring our grovelling days.
Yeah, I got to congratulate you, mate. You've done well. It only took you one grovel.
Yeah, so welcome to the show, Selby, the GOAT.
Yeah.
Milera's Magic. A lot of people would know him on as Twitter.
Yeah.
And I call him the GOAT because he really is the father of the modern day fantasy philosophies. I've learnt a lot from his podcast and his season guide, which I've been a user of the last couple of seasons.
Yeah, and proceeds for that one goes to a great cause as well, which is worth a shout out.
So it goes out to charity. So if you haven't ever used any of his stuff before, I would highly recommend it if you are a serious hat chaser.
Yep.
But he has officially followed me on Twitter, and hopefully, Selby, if you're listening, shout out to you, mate. I'll extend the invite, I guess, to everyone else of the fantasy community, all the other podcasts out there, the Hat Chat boys, the Pod boys, the coaches
I
panel
thought the groveling was
guys.
over.
This is just the one last little grovel. If you want to come and give us a follow, we would love to have you on board. We want to get everyone around us.
Selby followed you, but he didn't follow me. I don't even begrudge him. Like I can only imagine a guy who's won it twice probably had
I've paid him money before, so maybe that's
okay,
it.
so you've paid him off. I can imagine he had a brief look at my Twitter and thought, yeah, it's not for me.
Well, Selby, let's get on board Luke Rojo 17. But yes, thank you to everyone, all the big names that have come across and followed us on Twitter. It's honestly didn't expect this kind of response so quickly. Like
really
we've
nice.
only been recording these podcasts it's January 23. I think our first
Couple of
podcast
weeks,
was
really.
on the 3rd. So it's all happened very quickly, and we've been embraced. And thank you everyone so far that's done that so far.
Been awesome fun.
Let's talk about some fantasy forwards. I'll let you lead off our first guy. I didn't want to talk about him on this podcast, but you insisted.
Look, Mitch didn't want to talk about Dusty. And to be honest, as far as fantasy goes,
I love Dusty.
No, and as far as fantasy goes, I don't really want to talk about him either. But if someone says you get a chance to talk about Dusty, then I always talk about Dusty. Yeah, so there will be some people out there that might be thinking, hey, maybe Dusty presents a little bit of value. I don't know if I would subscribe to that theory. But when you've got a guy who has previously averaged 110 and he's priced in the mid-70s, I guess there's always going to be people who go and reach for that, but you are reaching a fair way back. So in his Brownlow season, when the Tigs won their first premiership, he did average 110, but we know that a lot's changed for Dusty since then. So last year, he only played the 9 games. He obviously had some reasonably significant stuff going on in his personal life as well. And we all kind of know that Dusty's definitely not the kind of person that will put that stuff on hold, which I respect about him. I think he goes and he sorts that kind of stuff out, and he is a big family man as well. From what I can understand, I'm speaking like I know him personally.
He's your best mate, isn't he?
Well, he doesn't know that yet. But so I just don't see he's priced at 75, 76, and to give us any sort of significant upside, he'd be needing to go around the 100, and I just don't see it happening.
95.
You think about what's happening at what's happening at Richmond as well. They're bringing in gun midfielders
right.
to play in the midfield so that Dusty can be the damaging forward that we know he's going to be. Yeah, maybe he goes and averages 3 goals a game, but that doesn't mean he averages 100 points.
Yeah, so a few years ago, 2018, 2019, 2020, after his big 113 season, he has averaged 93, 97, 90 points. So, priced at 76, if he went and did that actually wouldn't be the worst pick. I just don't see it happening again. And I wouldn't want to rely on it. It's a very downsidey kind of pick. He doesn't tackle anymore, much to my criticism. But he's a name that some people might gravitate and catch their eyes. But I think in terms of fantasy, there's too many other great options to even really consider a Dusty Martin. But in case you were, I would encourage you to scratch him off your list.
And if he does go well, trust me, I'll be cheering him on. But that's more as a Dusty fan than a fantasy fan.
Yeah, that's as a footy fan. So let's move on to the next guy here.
Next fellow's a different story.
This next guy here, we do need to absolutely consider. Ben Cunnington, North Melbourne. He's 31 years old, so doesn't make my team. I don't research much further than that.
Okay. I've been waiting for this episode because this, of all the 30-plus guys that I thought you might be considering, I thought he might be the option, but I really want to hear your thoughts.
I just don't think there's enough meat on the bone. I think that in terms of, especially in a forward line where there's so many other options, I'd have to be wowed and I have to be sort of blown away with the value that I think there could be there. He has never really been a enormously high upside fantasy player. He's much better suited to that Supercoach style format where he's, in and under contested clearances, which rewards that kind of player a bit more. His season high average was actually in the 2021 season where he went 99 on 15 games, mind you. So not the entire season, but outside of that, he's only had one other season averaging 90 plus.
Yeah.
And so I just don't expect at 31 years of age, you're going to put up sort of, close to career high numbers. And I don't know if he's back into the midfield as much as he was back in those seasons. Obviously, he's coming into a slightly different team. There's a few young guns in there that I think demand the opportunity more than him. And obviously, Sam Doherty set a high bar coming off his sort of, treatment and battle with cancer.
I think that's fantasy aside, that's worth acknowledging, isn't it? This is a fella who, if he comes back and he plays, AFL footy,
all the credit to him.
Oh my goodness, to go through something like that and come back is amazing. I kind of subscribe to your theory there, Mitch. I think he'd have to basically put up career best numbers to be 20 points of upside.
Yep.
If he only played 2 games,
the problem is though, he's being discounted on his career high.
Exactly, that's the problem.
Which is just tough.
Yeah, he only played the 2 games last year, and that's why he's not priced at that average of the 52. If he was, I think it'd be a different story.
Priced at 75. It's just so you'd want him to go 90 to 95 to justify that pick, in my opinion.
For me, he's still, even with all those flags that you kind of mentioned, he's still a guy that if it gave me the right balance in my team and I was able to get to a guy that I wanted to and then it was sort of Cunnington or someone else, I still can see a scenario where I put Cunnington in. If he plays an uninterrupted season and there's not much detriment to his role with other players coming into that midfield, then I don't see him really going under 90. And that would be kind of 15 points of upside. And if it kind of made something else work for me. So if someone said to me, hey, Luke, I'm going to select Cunnington, I'm not poo-pooing them. Do you know what I mean? It's not to that point.
Yep.
But it's...
I think, it's tough. It's tough because obviously you want to be selecting the best players. Cunnington, when in 2021, when he was putting up his career high, he was going in there at 72% CBAs. By no means were North Melbourne a good team that year. They're probably not going to be a great team this year. So, look, it wouldn't astound me or shock me if he does get sort of close to that ballpark, but I'm just not necessarily willing to sort of go out there and bet money on the fact that he would
and career best numbers.
And when I've got a few other options that I feel like I could do, I think there's usually some other way I can find the money to sort of make my team work. But like I said, it wouldn't shock me if he, at the end of the season, if he's right around that top 10 forward line. It wouldn't surprise me completely.
This is probably a good opportunity to acknowledge the fact that the forwards are little bit unique this year in the fact that if you've listened to our previous pod, you'll see that there's actually plenty of undervalued premiums that could be starting in our squads this year. So looking at this list, I can really kind of only see myself maybe picking one of these players. You're going to pick your undervalued premiums, you pick maybe one of these mid-prices, and then hopefully we've got some rookies to fill our forward line with. So You're right, Cunnington, top bloke, hope he goes really well, but I think there's a guy on this list that I might have pegged before him.
Yeah, I think so too. And, we're looking at, and typically, and to just piggyback off your point, typically the forward line is the opposite in terms of we usually have a lot of breakout guys where we can go that cheaper sort of price point because it's not that hard to crack into those top 6 forwards historically. If you go an 80-85, maybe that's sometimes enough to be that top 6 forward.
Heaney wasn't great last year, and he got pretty close.
He was top 6, and so in seasons past, you've sort of had players sort of pop in and out by the nature of the position and how they designate those forward eligible players. But I think that Cunnington, he's more popular in other formats than ours. But I think that, for AFL Fantasy, I'm not looking into him too heavily personally. Let's move on to the next guy.
Yeah, so we've got a fella who's coming back into the North Melbourne fold, and we're going to a fella who departed as quick as he came in, pretty much. So
pretty controversially too.
And this I didn't know how to feel at the time about this fella. I kind of had that feeling in my gut, like, I don't know if that's what you do. But then, player empowerment. If you're in a position that is not working for you, I guess go and change that. Jason Horne-Francis is the young fella that we're talking about, and I think is it too? Am I being too harsh to say that he had probably a disappointing first season based on where he was drafted.
Yeah. There was a lot of hype. Obviously, a number 1 draft pick.
He wore Dacos.
I think the tough thing for him is he's drafted ahead of a Nick Dacos.
Yes.
Now, I always wonder with those kind of things, the father-son, if Dacos wasn't a father-son, are you picking him number 1? I think you were.
Yeah.
I think, obviously, as a North Melbourne club, you want to sort of give that illustration that, hey, we'd pick you number 1 anyway to give him sort of that vote of confidence or whatever. But obviously wasn't enough in this situation. He's gone over to the Port Adelaide Footy Club. He averaged last season, what did he average?
62.
62 points per game. He also did that on a 42% CBA clip. So he was in there for stretches.
That's significant for a rookie too.
For a rookie, so he had points in there. I think, obviously, young player, there's some fluctuations there. His highest score for the season was in round 4 against the Swans. He did come out and have a 94, but mixed in there, you had a few 30. It was a 35, there was a 29, there was a 49. No, I don't think any of these were injury-affected games. He's someone that I can sort of find, he goes missing a little bit. I think he's prone to giving away some free kicks a lot at times as well.
It didn't appear his mindset was right last year either.
Did not.
I know we're assuming a lot just watching a fella on television. It's it might be harsh to say, but it just didn't have that feel to it. There's almost a feeling with me this year, I almost wish I could hit the reset button on him and go have another go as a rookie price player, because I hope for his sake that being in a place where he's requested to go, hopefully his footy comes on leaps and bounds.
There was I feel like that element of just frustration being in the side that he was in and sort of not necessarily playing to, not that they weren't playing to win, but obviously knowing that you're going to win very few games.
It would have been a frustrating side.
But in saying that, a lot of rookies drafted highly come into those situations and maybe handle it a lot better, in my opinion. So, look, I didn't really love the way it all went down, just from a footy fan in me kind of point of view. In terms of fantasy, the fact that he has already had that sort of 42% exposure to the centre bounces, we sometimes talk about that second year jump. Port Adelaide's midfield
I see that potentially going down.
Yeah, it's probably more stacks than the Roos.
So
we talked about Rosie and Butters in the last podcast. Yep. You've still got Wines in there. You've got Boak, who's still probably not completely out. What are they doing? Willem Drew. There's still a lot of names to go in there.
I wonder what that conversation was like, Mitch, when they're going, okay, we'll get you over. I wonder if there were any promises made or... I think it would have been hard to be demanding.
Not because,
it's hard in that situation to be making demands.
Exactly, yeah. So. And I think it's more just eventually we're going to get you in there, but maybe just not this season. I still expect him to be maybe 30%, 25% in there, but again, when you've already experienced 42%, and he probably will be better in season 2. He's at a better club,
yeah.
So there is room for his price and his scoring to go up, but I just don't think it's enough for me to confidently lock him in and sort of project a huge sort of second year breakout, despite him having high promise as a junior. So
I think we both agree it's a no there.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty easy no for me.
And there's every chance in the years to come he goes on to be a premium. Like if you're that as like an under 18er, a lot of those guys go on to be big accumulators, but we'll just have to wait and see with him.
Yeah, this next guy here. So we had a couple of no's so far. This next guy here there's a lot to talk about.
Okay,
but he does interest me.
Okay, and so you're not going to go as far to say yes just yet.
No, I'm not saying yes just yet, but he definitely interests me.
Okay.
Unfortunately, he interested me last year. Taryn Thomas.
A lot of people were burnt, weren't they?
I started with him in my team last year, and I've got some learnings from Taryn Thomas, and I couldn't.
Okay,
I couldn't quite place my finger on sort of what went wrong and why the pickup went wrong last year for me picking him in my starting squad.
Well, it went wrong because he went poorly.
He played poorly in that first game. Actually started off the second game with a flyer, but got injured at halftime at 49. So he was on track to turning up on that second game and doing what I expected him to do, but obviously not to be. And then after that,
it's pretty poor.
A lot of other off-court issues, mindset. Off field. And then obviously he's been in the news recently, which I will cover in a second. But just to go back to that point, what went wrong with me selecting him last year is the thing that I talked about you before about picking and choosing your sample sizes.
So you picked the last 5 games.
I did the last 5 games. And I think that's where a learning for me now.
Yeah.
Obviously, when I reflect on his season, he actually was in the centre bounces a little bit before those last 5 games. Now, the last 5 games for his season in 2021, he did really well. I'll just pull up the stats in front of me. He went at 107. That's right.
With scores of 126 and 120 in there.
Yeah, so he had some ceiling about him, but that was on 50% CBAs. But if I actually extend that sample size out to round 6 onwards, when he started getting more centre bounce attendances, 48.5%. So only in those last 5 games, it was only 1.5% more than what he'd been doing for most of that season. He was averaging 86.5. So big discrepancy, 20 points discrepancy there. And obviously by selecting that smaller sample size and just kind of assuming that was his trajectory, I think that's what undid me in that kind of a pick. So,
and it's good to acknowledge that, because I think that's a trap that a lot of people fall into. And even listening to us, we sometimes pick and choose the sample. Hey, it's 7 games in the middle of the season. Hey, it's this. So be sure to do your own research and to really ask yourself why is it the change? If there's a role change, if there's a distinct difference, sometimes I've reflected in these podcasts and talked about when a player gets X amount of percent CBAs, this is what they score. Or in like a Dylan Moore's case, so there was a clear, now he's in the centre bounces. Before he was just used as a forward. So I think those hold a bit more weight, whereas these sort of last 5 post-buy, if it's kind of more of the same at the start of the season, it holds a little bit less weight in my eyes. But I want to talk to you about, I'm not sure if you've had much time to sort of research this, but he's been in the news recently. He has.
What are your thoughts on the off-field stuff affecting his fantasy?
So my understanding is he was maybe charged with unlicensed driving or something like that. But in
the off-season,
that's sort of semantics. Look,
I think there was also, I think he was also charged with, and I'm going to screw this up, and I apologize if I do, but he was charged with threatening to expose an intimate photo of an ex-girlfriend or something like that, which is obviously not on and not something that we endorse, but we're trying to view this from a point of how does this affect his availability to the team, and how does this affect his legitimacy to put up fantasy stats for us.
So from my perspective, this probably goes to a point that I actually made on the last podcast, and that was that I like to pick guys in the team who show me not just in their football ability, but in their character, that they're the kind of player who isn't going to drop their head on the field. They're going to be the consummate professional. They're not going to miss games through ill discipline stuff. And no doubt there's factors that might be contributing to some of those off-field choices for Taryn as well. But that stuff, doesn't spook me, but it pushes me towards the no camp. And when I looked at the stats, I was less interested maybe than you were, Mitch. The tempting part of it is he's valued at 53.
Yeah.
So if he plays, cheap. It is. And if he plays all the games and he does get some of that midfield time, then you can definitely see 30, if not more points of upside. But for me, it was just too scary looking at those previous stats. So even last year, he had that injury-affected score in round 2, but then when he came back, he didn't set the world on fire. Just in the very short time watching me, he kind of strikes me as that guy that if it does start going wrong, there might be a little bit of mental fragility there. So maybe a little bit scary for me, but I can definitely see why it would be very tempting.
Yeah, so there's probably two things that make me still a little bit interested. And I've heard a couple of podcasts, not to name any, that have sort of completely ruled him off with a lot of this preseason news. And I'm not doing that. I don't want to rule him out of my team. It's definitely a negative. It's not something you want to see.
Yeah, you don't want to really be ruling lots of players out this time.
Especially at this time. So for me, I think that, number one, without picking and choosing that sample size, what we saw with that role where he was kind of going at that nearly 50% CBA role on a North Melbourne club, he was averaging 86.5. Yep. So at this price point, that's 30 points of upside right there. With the potential of maybe doing more as a younger player. Now, obviously, last year we didn't see as much of that. It was disappointing. So my confidence in him getting there in that role may be a lot less than it was 12 months ago. The other thing that has me interested is the fact there's a lot of reports out there with him playing the half-back role this season and maybe doing a little bit of that and the midfield. And obviously, half-back compared to playing in the forward line is a lot different when it comes to fantasy scoring.
Yep.
And we've seen players like Zeeble, we've seen players like Aaron Hall on this sort of North Melbourne Footy Club really got a lot of scoring opportunities in terms of fantasy points in that sort of a role. So Taryn is 23 years old, still young. There's obviously been high raps on him from a footy point of view in the past. He's disappointed last season because of attitude and off-season stuff, but the talent's still there.
Yeah, talent doesn't go away.
It's still someone that I'm watching. I'm watching in the preseason, and he does have that upside to be that 85 to 90 guy. And when you're priced at 55, that's a lot of upside and potentially someone that you could carry for a long way through the season if it all goes well. Now, it's a lot of ifs.
It's one of those things.
It is still something I'm looking at.
Yeah, if you were to completely shut your eyes to him and not be watching him, I think that would be a little bit irresponsible. But it's going to go one of two ways. And he's going to look at the off-season stuff and he's going to go, I've got to make amends, or it could all spiral for him. So hopefully for him as a person and a footy player, it all goes well. But another one, we wait and see.
Yeah, I would be lying if I said that he hasn't spent a little bit of time training with the boys at Mitchman. So he's part of the squad, but by no means, obviously, locking him in. Okay. So definitely one I'm keeping an eye on.
Well, that culture at Mitchman should really pull him into line.
Bring him in, yeah. Between myself and Clarko, we can probably get him on the straight and narrow. There's two coaches. All right, let's move on to another young player here in Tanner Bruhn. Moved from the GWS Giants over to Geelong.
Yep.
Obviously, potentially maybe seeking more of a role, or at least getting away from a team that maybe hasn't performed to obviously the premiership winning side in Geelong.
Interestingly,
priced cheaply.
Yeah, and I don't know Tanner's motivations for the move, of course, but if it was kind of to get more CBAs, there's a couple of guys that have left GWS that might have opened up a few. But you're right, he is off to Geelong. So what we see from his data at GWS is he's kind of got a reasonably low time on ground for other similar type players. So he's an interesting one in the fact that he kind of hovers around that mid-60s to 70% time on ground. There are some 80s in there, but sort of in that range. But then also with 27% CBAs. And I know compared to some of the guys we talk about, 27% CBAs isn't all that high. But I kind of feel...
It's at least in there a little bit, isn't it?
Yeah, I feel like for a guy who averages 30% CBAs, I want to see a score better than 53 as an average.
Yeah.
Especially for a guy who's a midfielder, I'd want to see a bit more accumulation. And then for me, I think we mentioned this with can't recall his name. The other fellow who went to Geelong in the off-season.
Bose.
Bose. I think we said it with Bose. You know, Bose isn't strutting down there with the chest puffed out saying, boys, this is how you do it.
G'day, boys. Let me add it, and you guys just sit back.
Yeah, sorry, Tanner and Jack. We just want a flag. We'll show you how to do it. So for me, it's kind of like, maybe he's gone for some success. He's gone for a role, but Geelong haven't taken him in to be a fantasy pig, have they?
Yeah. No, obviously. And obviously Geelong, adjusted their game style a little bit last season and it wasn't the most friendly of adjustments. But I will say this about the Geelong midfield. They have a lot of guys running through there. And they're not shy about mixing and matching. They obviously sometimes rest some players here and there.
So do you see him more time on ground, more CBAs?
I don't know if it's more, but he will be there in a little bit, I think. So last year, what was he? He was 27%. I did take out some, so I tried to average all of the games where he was in the midfield at some point. So I took all of the games out where he had zero attendances. And in those games, averaging 39% CBAs, he averaged 63 points. So that gives him maybe close to sort of 10 points upside. Being 20 years old, could he then just naturally just get a little bit better? Maybe playing for a better side. There's a little bit there, but I'm reaching a lot there, and I think obviously there's more proven players there. So
when you find yourself reaching, it's probably a bit of a signal, isn't it? It's like, this is not my man.
Yeah, so I think that whilst there is potential there, I think that, like I said, there's probably just better options, but a name maybe just to monitor, bump up your draft boards potentially as a forward that could potentially...
Cheap and young.
Yeah, so let's move on to the next guy here. I originally thought that this guy could definitely be an option for us. I'm cooling on him recently.
Okay.
Darcy Tucker.
John Tucker.
So Darcy Tucker moved from the Freo Dockers to North Melbourne. So kind of the opposite of the player that we talked about in terms of going from a not-so-good team to a premiership-winning team.
Yep.
This player is going to North Melbourne, where you would think he walks in as maybe one of the more senior players, one of the more experienced players on that team. Yep. So comes in with a bit of a discount, priced at 51.6, 457,000. Still just 26 years old. He... is he a guy that comes in there and plays? He's played a bit of defence, played a bit of wing at times.
He's been a bit everywhere. In the COVID season 2020, so he went at about 50% CBAs for an average of just under 60, and I think adjusted, is that around 75? Is it 1.25?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
So let's say that's about 75. It's only kind of there was an 8-game sample in that year, so he didn't play all the games. There was an injured score of 1, but none of it filled me with confidence. So let me put it out. I'm rambling, but none of it filled me with confidence. He hasn't, in the last 3 years, he hasn't played the full season. The best he's kind of managed there is 61. I know sometimes when a guy changes club, particularly when they go to a club that perhaps is like lesser in stature, where they might get more opportunity, there's a tendency to maybe jump on players like that. But Darcy Tucker, for me, is a no-go. Another thing that factors into that as well is he's recently had knee surgery. I think he had meniscus surgery.
Did he? Yeah, I hadn't heard of that actually.
So he's had a slightly interrupted pre-season.
That's good information.
Always good to check my facts, but
at least one to look for.
I'll check my own facts here. But that's my understanding. So your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you sort of see what he's done in the past, and again, you sort of don't necessarily realise how long ago that it was. I mean, 2020, we take those scores with a grain of salt. 2019 was his highest averaging season, where he put up 73 in that time. So that's if we was to do that, that's more than 20 points of upside. Definitely something that you consider. But again, 73 probably doesn't bring you close enough to that top 10 forward line, especially in a year like this. So I think you're looking for a little bit more. And again, when you talk about like wingers, especially moving to a poor club, a lot of people would remember Will Phillips a couple of years ago, who was a guy who came from a Collingwood side over to a Hawthorn. He came into the preseason, absolutely blitzed it, and then came back and obviously was very disappointing that season because the Hawthorn side that he was coming to compared to the Collingwood side that he was coming from, there just wasn't enough points to go around to sort of get that outside ball that wingers kind of require to get their stats there. So I think for me, Darcy Tucker, I initially kind of thought there was a bit of upside, but I think it's too much of a reach for me to confidently say he's a decent pick.
Knee surgery in September, meniscal tear, suffered in the waffle. AFL.com.au.
There you go. All right, that's a pretty reliable source.
I would hope so.
All right, let's move on to the next guy here, who, again, I think is a very interesting option. Wayne Milera. Now, again, maybe sends shivers down your spine if you started him in your side like I did. Did you? Yep, you did too. As well. I think a lot of people did.
I think he and Rosie were the first on the chopping block after round
so
one.
Obviously disappointed. Played a very different role than what he's done in the past, though. He was used exclusively as a forward, really, last
which
season.
we know is poo-poo.
We don't want that, especially on a team like Adelaide, when they're not sort of the best in the comp, and the ball maybe doesn't spend as much time in their forward 50 as perhaps like a Geelong or a Melbourne does.
There's people that seem to... I mean, I know I've only been at it a couple of years, but there's people that seem to aggressively hype this guy, and I don't know if are they Crows fans. I'd like to get some inside intel, but I'm not sure what it is. I was burnt last year, and then people are going, "Hey, he's going to be waxing across halfback." I'm like, Jordan Dawson's going to be waxing across halfback.
Yeah.
For me, I don't. If that's the role you see him scoring well in, I think he's at least second fiddle to Jordan Dawson, if not other Adelaide backmen.
I mean, so if we were considering him last year, he was coming in, I can't remember exactly his price tag, but I feel like it's pretty similar, if not cheaper. Yeah. So if he was an option last year, and he's cheaper...
But does what he did this year make that worse?
So the reports are now that he's playing back in that halfback defense, like in the defensive line this preseason.
Weren't those the reports last season, and that's why we all jumped on?
Well, see, the thing was with him, he had a interrupted preseason last year. Maybe he didn't play a single preseason game. We expected him to we just kind of penciled him in there, hoping that he's clear value. He's enough value, and we never really gave it a second thought. Didn't play into the games. We weren't sure if he was going to be named, and then all of a sudden that night before, when all the teams drop, we panic. We see his name there. We're scrounging for value, and we just go in for Wayne Milera. But if he's having a better preseason this season around, and he's back in that defensive line.
So you're going to double dip? You're going to go again?
I think that there's some merit to it. I think that, obviously people are going to be burnt by it, but if we still have to look at it from like a logical point of view.
I know. I said we shouldn't be shutting our eyes.
So I mean, and it was 2018, 2019 put up averages of 75 and 77 in those seasons respectively.
So what's
he's
that?
still only 25. Like he's still a young player. So those averages he put up were in his third and fourth years. Yeah. He then obviously had only the 2 games in 2020 with injuries. 2021 missed the entire season. 2022 played a completely different role. So the most recent example of him playing in that role we have, although we maybe hope him to play, he's been a 75 guy. And where is he priced at the moment? He's priced at 50. 75,
so 25
points of upside potentially.
Without doing too much. I mean, if he plays in that role across halfback, even with Dawson down there, you really don't see him going much less than 70.
Is that enough? And is the downside worth that risk?
Yeah.
I think maybe 75, it's that shade away from that top 10, top 15 forwards. So
he's not
quite enough.
The guy on this list that you're considering. I'm assuming the next guy down is the guy you're most considering.
I think you might be right.
Yeah,
yes.
and then do you think that in the forward line this year you're going to pick 2 mid-prices? Or I know there's a lot of water to go under the bridge.
There could be potentially room for it. Right now, my structure is allowing 1 mid-pricer, but you could potentially, again, rookies dictate our structure. Maybe we've got so many gun rookies in our forward line that
Dunkley in the midfield.
It doesn't matter. I mean, who really knows at this stage? I think, I wouldn't rule it out.
Yeah.
But so far for me, like a Taryn Thomas and a Wayne Milera at least I'm still watching. I'm still considering the potential. Whereas this next guy here is the guy that's sitting on my side right now.
And I think most people have him in.
Yes, he's one of the more popular players. I think he's right up there at I want to say 40%.
So we're alluding to it, but we'll segue to Toby McLean.
Toby McLean from the Bulldogs.
This is a fella that, when you look into his history, he's had a little bit of a rough trot at it, but showed in 1 game last year, and it was the elimination final that the Dogs played, that A, he's still got it, and B, he goes about it in the right way. Yeah. So he's one of your typical guys that isn't afraid to get his hands dirty, fights above his weight class. My understanding, he's not a huge man by any means, but he gets down and dirty. He does those things, and you do have to go back to look for it. You do have to go back to look for it, but he's a guy that can score without CBAs.
Yes, yeah. So 2018 was his best season.
Yeah.
Averaged 94.5 points. And I don't... Again, that was the year before I started playing AFL Fantasy.
Yeah, so you do have to go back for it, but there's a reason you do. He's had a bit of disruption, but as much as we talk about, we want guys to have CBAs, when guys can come out and score like that without CBAs, that just makes your ears prick up a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah. So he and obviously there's scoring available or up for grabs at the Bulldogs. Lockie Hunter's gone. Josh Dunkley's gone. There's a lot of points gone from your team right there.
You don't see him being an inside midfielder, but I think you mentioned that previously.
I don't think so.
So it's probably more Hunter.
I think he's more that half-forward wing kind of type.
I guess Dunkley played a bit of half-forward,
So I think that's kind of the role I see him play. But again, when you're priced as cheaply as he is...
My days, so 45 or something.
Price at 45, 401,000. So one of the cheapest guys we're talking about on this list. He's 27 years old, so still right in the prime of his career. So
he's so risk-free, hey? Like, at that price...
it's like, if it doesn't work, you go down to a rookie and whatever.
Yeah.
I do really like the fact that he came back and played that final. That gives me a lot of confidence that the club was very keen to get him into the side.
Okay, yeah. Mitch is not saying, he scored 100 in one game. It's more about the
club's obviously thrown him straight in there. So that's a good thing in terms of the security in the team. That's right. And also just the fact that you got a guy coming off an injury from, I can't remember, is it an ACL that he's coming off of?
He did, yeah.
So a similar example would be like Sicily, for example. Not in terms of like obviously the position and scoring ability, but Sicily was a guy that a couple of seasons ago did his ACL towards the end of the season, missed the entirety of the next year, probably could have come back at the end of the year, but just held off because there was no real point rushing him back. Toby McLean has that kind of similar storyline where he's not coming into and still rehabbing that knee. He didn't do it in like round 3 of last year. Yeah. It's been 18 months since that injury, so he's a guy that's well and truly over that ACL, and I think he will have a pretty uninterrupted preseason. And by all reports, he's training well. So. Yeah,
and we'll be looking for that uninterrupted preseason, won't we? Guess how many tackles he had in the final?
What do you have? Oh, I've got it right in front of me. I looked 9.
But that's
good.
That's a hungry man, hey. That's what you want to see.
To do that in the forward line, I think is what he played. Maybe did push up to a little bit of wing, which is why he's got the midfield DPP there as well.
So for me, that kind of epitomises the point that I was making about selecting a guy based on his character as well as his footy ability. So for me, that's the opposite of kind of what Taryn Thomas is going through at the moment. This is a guy who's rehabbed an ACL. He's come back to play in a final, and he said, "Boys, jump on my back. I'm going to have 9 plus 4s." Yep. That speaks to the mentality of guys that you want to have in your team.
He scored 100 with no goals. I like that. Only had 2 marks, so he's got 21 disposals and 9 tackles. That's a guy who's just obviously he's fighting hard for those points. So I like that. I am just monitoring his role. Like, I don't think he's necessarily 100% lock. Like, if he comes out and he's playing like a forward pocket.
And he's going to be like 50.
Yeah, it's...
What's his ownership percentage?
It's at 29%. So of all these guys, he's by far the highest owned player. So 29%, that's decently high. I do expect it to probably climb up a little bit more as well. So he is probably definitely the most popular of these guys, and I think it's justified. I think he's probably maybe the safest.
So cheap. Like I said, he's risk-free almost, isn't he?
Yeah. We've got one more guy that we're going to talk about here.
The best name in the AFL.
Erasio Fantasia.
Thank you, Bruhn.
Yeah, there you go. So Erasio Fantasia, obviously, I think, did he miss every game of the season last year?
Yes, no games.
Yes, so 0 games. So obviously, he gets that 30% discount on the prior season. I think that might have been the second time he's done that. I played 1 game. Oh, sorry, did he play it? So... What have I got here? Unused substitute I've got here on FootyWire. So that's interesting in round 9. I'm not sure from memory if he came back and re-injured himself. But anyway, very cheap, priced at 45, so pretty much 1,000 cheaper than Toby McLean. He obviously is probably more of a traditional forward than a Toby McLean. Maybe doesn't get quite up the ground as much as him, but... has had seasons in the past where he's averaged close to 80 points. He's a pretty gun forward, but the role is probably not as friendly.
No, it's not. And the thing about Fantasia in this situation is really, fantasy-wise, he hasn't historically done anything to write home about, but he's just so cheap that's why he kind of makes this list for consideration. And I think he's been getting his tyres pumped up on social media as well. I think there's a few people getting around saying he's looking good. Maybe they're all Port Adelaide fans.
Yeah, but, maybe.
But he's just so cheap, so that's why you can't kind of completely snub him.
A couple of people started with him, I think it was 2 seasons ago when he was of a similar price. So
we're always looking for upside, and like to get 20 points of upside, he only has to do 65.
Yeah, it's not much.
And if he's in favour, I saw an interview with Ken Hinkley, and Ken Hinkley seemed pretty excited to have him back in the team and around the boys. So.
But I would argue that 65, even 20 points up, that's not enough. I'd need him to go 30, 40 plus points.
Yeah, because then you want him to,
because you compare him to the rookies,
that's
again,
exactly right.
those rookies are going 35 points over their price tag. So
he's essentially in that category, isn't he?
Yeah, so
I think some of these guys that we're talking about, we're presenting a bit of an opinion, but we're really only locking maybe one of these guys into our team, and at the minute, until proven otherwise, it's Toby.
Yeah, so for me, Toby McLean is the guy that's sitting in my side right now, but I am still keeping a close eye on Wayne Milera and Taryn Thomas are probably the 2 guys. Maybe Ben Cunnington if he... no, actually, he's 31. Oh. He's off the list.
Yeah, you can't backflip.
Yeah, no. So Taryn Thomas, Wayne Milera, but Toby McLean is clearly the man out in front right now.
Yeah.
Are you sort of McLean or no one? Like, what are your thoughts?
I'm not as maybe the word's comfortable with Milera and Taryn Thomas.
Sure.
But sometimes you have to make uncomfortable picks like that. That can be how you win it. Sometimes I'd imagine. So. Yeah, for me, I'm putting all my eggs in the McLean basket, and I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that comes off. As I put my team together and I kind of see the structure, I'll see whether there needs to be another mid-pricer in there or whether I can fill with rookies. But, I mean, we've said it so many times. We're so early on in the preseason. We're speculating at this point, and we really do need to see what happens with those rookies in the preseason to kind of lock some things in.
Yeah. So that's it for our mid-pricer forwards. Let us know down in the comments if you think we've forgotten anyone else you think we should consider. What are your thoughts on all of these players, and how many do you have in your team right now? Next podcast, we've got that dreaded other position. So we've done our defenders, done our mids, done our forwards.
Set and forget.
Set and forget,
with Hooper.
Yeah. Max and Grundy, right?
Mundy.
Gaundy.
Gaundy.
Yeah, Gaundy was the one. So, going to go through the rucks. We're going to just dedicate one whole podcast to basically all of the relevant rucks in fantasy this year. So, obviously, less options. So, we won't do the overpriced, underpriced, mid-prices. Just going to go through all the options that we think potentially could be viable in that position. And then there might be a sneaky team reveal coming next week. And talking
on some new content.
Points of difference, all this sort of good stuff coming. So, again, make sure you guys are subscribed, like the video, follow us on Twitter. If you're listening on podcast, give us a 5-star rating. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.